What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by TarHillIllustrated.com. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. Joining me as he always does, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here for a fun podcast, at least in my opinion. I think it's a pretty fun one to talk about, as we're going to be talking about Carolina's history, for lack of a better word, of freshman point guards. Now, I will say, AJ, a handful of these guys, a big chunk of these guys did start during their freshman year, but there are some that didn't start, but maybe a handful of games. So I guess more the correct way to say it would guys that during their freshman year at least had some kind of prominent role as the point guard at North Carolina. So AJ, we're going to go in chronological order. So we're going to start way back in the day with a guy that I know a lot of Carolina fans absolutely love, and a guy that, you know, a lot of especially older Carolina fans consider a great of Carolina basketball. And I think that goes without saying, and that's Phil Ford, played from 1973 to 1977. So AJ, when I think Phil Ford, I think Four Corners. That's the first thing that comes up in my head. But talk to me a little bit about Phil Ford, and, you know, I guess even more specifically on his freshman year, because I think that's what we're kind of here to focus on a little bit more.
I think of a pull-up jump shot in transition in the lane.
That's a little different. I think it's a little different. I
think of using that to set up a head fake and then go into the rim, and when there's a defender back in transition. The Four Corners, obviously, the emotion of his senior night, the relationship with Dean. And Dean was always someone who publicly didn't place anyone higher than anybody else. But I would imagine if he would have had a cannon pointed at his head at some point and had to say, this was my favorite player I coached, it would probably be Phil Ford. And not too far behind maybe Charlie Scott. But I think Phil Ford would have been the guy. They had a very special relationship well beyond the playing days, and Phil was on his staff even when his career ended. I will tell you this much, and don't take this the wrong way. When you get into this business and you have a chance to meet a lot of people that are very well known, very, very successful, in order to be able to do your job, I'll say that you get a little desensitized to it. In other words, there's not much of a wow factor. Like, I remember interviewing LeBron James in the Heat locker room in Charlotte, and there was no wow factor at that point, right? But I will admit that the first time I interviewed Phil Ford, he's one of the few athletes I had a little bit of a wow factor with, because as someone who grew up watching ACC basketball, his name and David Thompson's name were preeminent. And I did meet David Thompson, had a little wow factor there as well. So there aren't many people on my wow factor list, but Phil Ford was one of them. He was a great player. Of all the Carolina players who didn't win a national championship, that I wish did, because it would be the exclamation point on their careers, it would be Phil. I know that someone did something on our board week ago about how amazing it is that Stackhouse, Wallace, Carter, Shammond Williams, Coda, Jamison didn't win a national championship. None of them won a title. I would put Phil Ford at the top of that list.
Yeah, no doubt.
There's no doubt about it. And he got close. They were ahead with 13 minutes left in the 77 title game, a very banged up Carolina team. He was one of the guys banged up. He had like 3 injuries, and Dean went to the Four Corners, and they ended up losing to Marquette. A lot of people like to blame Bruce Buckley for a missed layup, but it's just one of those things. So,
basketball, man.
Yeah. So anyway, Phil was tremendous, absolutely tremendous, and someone that still goes down in history as one of the top 3 Tar Heels of all time, and probably will forever, because not just the numbers, and he was a leading scorer for a long time, but I think that there is an emotional connection to him from the fans, especially of that era, maybe more so than any player that came before and has come since. I would think that Phil Ford, his senior night, for the people in the building, engendered a higher percentage of tears in the eyes than anybody else's senior night.
Yeah, I think that's correct. And I put a tweet out a few weeks ago about asking people, you know, if you had to build 3 statues or 4 statues outside of each gate of the Smith Center, who would go at each one? And Phil Ford was a name that just popped up everywhere. You know, just a ton of reverence, especially, like I said, from older Carolina fans who lived during that era. Rocky Mount guy as well. I've got family connections in Rocky Mount. So, you know, just him and Peppers in terms of what they did for Carolina, how big they are in terms of Carolina. It's wild to know that they both came from, a smaller town in Eastern North Carolina. So yeah, really good stuff. And, Phil Ford, I mean, it goes without saying, if you're a Carolina fan, you know exactly who he is and what he did for the university. AJ, let's keep it moving. Kenny Smith next on the list, played from 83 to 87. Kenny the Jet Smith. Obviously, his son played on the team a few years ago as well. So some family connections in there as well. And again, AJ, I mean, I'm looking at this point guard list right now, and there's not a bad player on it. I'll just start off by saying that. But Kenny Smith, and another just exceptional Tar Heel back in the 80s.
I saw him play in high school when he was at Archbishop Malloy. They played a tournament in Arlington, Virginia at O'Connell High School, which is where Marcus Ginyard went. O'Connell was one of our rivals in basketball back in the day, but I was a paying customer that night.
Nice.
and Kenny was a little bit ahead of me, I guess, but he was awesome. Everybody knew who he was, and he went to Carolina. And you could argue that maybe right out of the gate, he might be the best true freshman point guard ever at Carolina, because they were awesome. His situation was similar to Elliot Cadeau. And don't get me wrong here. I'm not comparing Perkins and Jordan and Matt Doherty and that crew to what Carolina has coming back now. But what I'm saying is he went into a situation where he was a freshman and he had a lot of older guys around him, especially stars. I mean, Jordan was a star. Perkins, as a senior, was a 3-time first-team All-America. Yeah. And here's this freshman that came in there, and he blended perfectly. People have seen him for years on TV. You can understand why he would be a mature 18-year-old blending in with older guys and being the right fit, because he had tremendous confidence. He had personality. He had intelligence, and he had a great feel for the game. And he was one of those guys who could be a pass-first point guard when he needed. He found his teammates, but he could also score a lot too. And he just was the perfect combination for the rest of those guys. That was a deep team. His freshman year, the 84 team, you could argue is the best Carolina team to never win a national title. If he doesn't break his wrist against LSU, that team may not have lost a game. They were 21-0 when they lost at the buzzer. They missed shot at the buzzer at Arkansas. That's back when teams used to play non-conference games well into conference season. They were 21-0 when they went in there, and they ended up losing 3 games. And the last one, of course, Sweet 16 to Indiana. Not picking at Dean here, but if you were to maybe criticize Dean for a few coaching decisions he made in his career, one would be the 4 corners against Marquette in 77. Another one might be sitting Jordan with 2 fouls as long as he did against Indiana in the Sweet 16 in 1984. And Kenny Smith had basically had a hoof he was playing with. So had he been healthy and never broken his wrist, that club was on a beeline to face Georgetown again. Patrick Ewing was still at Georgetown. They beat Georgetown 2 years earlier in the national title. So we could have had another epic North Carolina-Georgetown meeting, but could have doesn't matter in sports because it didn't happen. But Kenny was phenomenal, had a great career. He was the point guard on 2 teams that went unbeaten in ACC play.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost hard to believe. I mean, you don't see that really anymore in today's game, especially from Carolina. You know what I mean? It's crazy.
Yeah, you don't see it. You might see it in the Atlantic 10 every once in a while.
Yeah, but you're not seeing it.
But if you get a great Dayton team in there, they could run the table. But especially with so many more conference games, undefeated back then was 14-0 because there were 8 teams in the league. Florida State hadn't arrived yet. Georgia Tech was new in the league in 79-80 season. So, and they were horrible when they arrived. By that point, by the time Kenny got there, they were pretty good. Bobby Cremins had that thing humming. But in fact, the ACC was awesome at that time. In 85, the ACC, the last place team in the ACC was Virginia, I think, and they went 3 rounds in the NIT. In 84, Virginia finished 6-8, and they went to the Final Four. They lost to Houston by 2 points or whatever it was. They were a bucket away from playing Georgetown for the national title. They had a losing record in the ACC. That's how good the league was back then.
Just a lot more competitive and complete top to bottom, it sounds like, back in those days compared to how it is now, where you've got a handful of pretty good teams for the most part. And well, even today in the ACC, seems like most teams are mediocre, and you've got 1 or 2 pretty good teams. It seems like that's what we get nowadays. But
and check me on the Virginia NIT thing. I think I got that a little bit mixed up because someone will attack me on that.
Yeah, someone's coming for your head.
But they were 6-8. It was the year after Ralph Sampson.
Oh, yeah.
So Ralph went to a Final Four as a sophomore, and I was a junior and senior, but Olden Polynice got there the following year as their center.
You got to love it, man. No, Kenny Smith, man. And again, he won't be the last guy we talk about on this list who got injured or played through injury or played with an injury in an NCAA tournament. And there's even a guy coming up not too long from now that had a wrist injury as well, and that team's a big what-if team too. So some kind of theme with North Carolina point guards getting hurt in the NCAA tournament, especially when they're on really good teams. It is weird how many times that's happened in the history of North Carolina, but is what it is. AJ, next one on the list, Ed Coda, another guy, played from 96, 2000, another guy that's just, revered by a lot of Carolina fans, especially, I would assume, guys that were maybe in high school, college during that time. I could see where Coda might be one of their favorite ever Carolina players. And he was a guy on the tweet I put out as well that maybe surprised me a little bit with some guys were saying it wasn't nearly as much as a guy like Phil Ford, but there were some Ed Coda shouts for statues at the Smith Center. Not sure I agree with that one, but still really, really fantastic point guard and a guy that a lot of people are comparing Elliot Cadeau to in terms of playing style, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elliott's, we've talked about combination sort of between Coda and Kendall Marshall, more of a scorer than both, more athletic than both, that kind of thing. Coda was an incredible distributor. He could find open guys in a millisecond. He didn't start much his freshman year, only started 4 or 5 games. They were as fun to watch. They could score so quickly in the half court because of Coda and because they had guys that can move. Coda and Jamison were an amazing combination. I was telling you before we started recording, that was back in the day when the media could sit on the baseline in Chapel Hill. And I used to sit often on the baseline on the side of the basket closest to Carolina's bench, usually somewhere in the middle there. And I'll never forget multiple times, Jamison used to go back from block to block, rotating block to block. He was constantly moving. He never got tired. And there were a couple times where he was rotating from one block back to the other. Coda just penetrates. He's looking somewhere else, drops a perfect dime. Jamison goes up and scores. It happened countless number of times. And when I say drop a dime, when I think of Ed Coda, I think about the bounce pass, the two-step penetration, draw defense a little bit, make the defense move, and drop a dime, literally, to somebody for a bucket. He made it so easy for guys. They had to be ready. You had to kind of keep your head on a swivel because Ed would find you, but that group was ready. Jamison was the most ready to score at any time big I've ever covered at Carolina, and the quickness with which he did it was amazing. So he helped Ed's assist numbers a lot, but Ed helped him score a ton of points and become National Player of the Year as well. So they were a tremendous combination. Then you throw the Shimon Williams, Ed Coda factor out there, Adam Molokolaj, all those guys, and what a beautiful basketball team that was to watch. And it's when Coda got into his sophomore year, he was just racking up the assists, and everybody had a defined role, and they were damn good at it.
Yeah, no, Coda's just a fantastic player. And again, I've always been a big fan of the kind of the guys that maybe, for lack of a better term, pass first point guards. I find them very fun to watch instead of maybe a ball hawk who just wants to score. I like guys who get in the lane, try to create for others. To me, they're a lot more fun to watch, and I think Carolina fans would agree. I think that's why, not only because he's really good, but I think that's why a lot of Carolina fans have kind of a special place in their heart for a guy like Ed Coda, because not, like I said, really good player, but the way he played too is very entertaining and involving others. And I think it's a fun brand of basketball to watch in terms of what he used to do.
Well, I think an assist is the most beautiful aspect of basketball.
100%, man. I mean,
I think number one.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of a triple down the line that kicks off something and a guy gets a triple in baseball. And I'm an enormous fan of the assist. Oh,
no doubt about it. No doubt about it. AJ, moving on in the list, we'll talk about Raymond Felton next. Played from 2002 to 2005, obviously won a national title at North Carolina. Man, when I think Ray Felton, I think toughness. I think that's the number one thing that comes to mind. Just a tough guy. Think about the shot he hit late, the 3 against Illinois in the national championship game, running back down the court, putting his fist up like that to set up. I'll never forget that photo. It's a legendary photo. If I remember to put it in here, I'll put it in there. But big time player who made big time plays in big time games. Ray Felton, just another really good Carolina point guard. And real quickly, AJ, everybody on this list is pretty dang good. I'll go ahead and preface that, but Ray Felton, just a fantastic point guard for Carolina.
You're right. Physically tough and mentally tough.
Mentally, yeah.
He was the point guard in Doherty's last year as a freshman. And he was, I think Matt was a little different with him than he was some of the other guys. And it was probably wise because Raymond kind of kept that thing together a lot. And part of it was just because of the way he approached the game. I mean, he wasn't always really good. He wasn't always a clean player, but man, he never lacked for effort. You knew it was going to come because he oozed potential. And I just think the toughness factor, he was physically tough. He was mentally tough. He could play with emotion, but he channeled it really well. And of course, here's a guy who could find teammates. He's a guy who eventually turned himself into a really good perimeter shooter. He struggled early on. You mentioned the 3 he hit against Illinois. I told you the story about standing outside their locker room after they won the title in 2005, and Dean and MJ are right there waiting for the team, and Ray was the first one. And the interaction he had with Michael and some of the things he said. And that was, to me, that moment sort of personified what Raymond was all about. To me, I got a chance to see it. A lot of other people didn't, but he poured so much in to being the best he could be in North Carolina. And I saw it pour out in that moment. And I think that process began the moment he stepped on campus. And that trio of freshmen with McCants and Sean May, and Sean unfortunately broke his foot in December that year in a game against Iona in Madison Square Garden. They were really, really good, but what gave them a little layer of maturity, in my opinion, was Raymond, especially since Sean missed a bunch of games. So, man, he was a treat to watch. Yeah. I went to Latta, South Carolina, and did it and talked to a bunch of people, spent a day and a half there and did a piece on him. I had 2 one-on-one interviews with him when he was in school, and there are very few Carolina players whose story I enjoyed more. And maybe it's because I got a chance to learn more. When I went to a diner in Latta, and I told them what I was doing, and immediately the first thing this one girl said was chicken tenders.
Yeah.
I said, what do you mean? She goes, chicken tenders. When I knew Ray was coming in, we had to make sure we got a plate of chicken tenders for him because he always wanted chicken tenders. And for some reason, I never stopped thinking about that when I saw him. I remember saying something to him one time about chicken tenders. He just started laughing. He knew exactly the girl I was talking about and the diner I was talking about. So that was cool stuff. I went to a fire station in Latta, just walked in there, randomly, if you will, and said, I'm doing a piece told him who I was, doing a piece on Raymond Felton, and these firemen from different generations, different backgrounds, different everything, just started rambling about how proud they were of him, not just because of basketball, because of who he was.
No, just
is.
Yeah, just a legendary Carolina point guard for a number of different reasons. Obviously, capping it off with winning the national title. You do that, you're going to go down in history at North Carolina as a starting point guard. So, yeah, another one on the list. Long NBA career, too. I mean, just in the league forever, it felt like.
Made cash.
Yeah, man. Oh, yeah. Made plenty of cash. Was at a game last year as well. Like, he was in the Smith Center for at least one game last year. I can't remember what game it was.
I saw him. I didn't have time. I wanted to go up and say something to him up there. I saw him up in the stands, but I just didn't have time. So hopefully if he comes to a game next year, I will. I really enjoyed him. He went through a lot at Carolina, and I think he grew a ton and just a magnificent career. Capped it off with a title. He's one of the guys on this list that did get a title.
Yeah, in
the first 3 didn't get one.
Yeah, in today's world of college basketball, Ray Felton would have transferred probably. You know what I mean? Maybe not him specifically, but a lot of guys would have bolted with how easy it is to leave now with the Doherty situation.
But he was given carte blanche. I mean, the Doherty situation didn't affect him personally as much as it did the other guys because Matt sort of laid off him more.
Yeah.
So, when the meeting was, I don't want to get all into this, but when the meeting was called and the players didn't initiate things, they were called into a meeting. Raymond just had a different tone. I'll leave it at that. There's no point in revisiting any of that stuff now. It doesn't do anybody any good.
The past is the past.
Just know that I have a ton of respect for Raymond. I had it back then. I really liked him, enjoyed him, and I still have it now.
Yeah, no, great Carolina player. All right, moving on, AJ. Bobby Frazier played at Carolina from 2005 to 2009. Started a ton of games, obviously, during his freshman year at Carolina. Was the guy for them in kind of a freshman season that went above expectations in a lot of different ways with how good that younger team. I know it had a nucleus of older guys, like your David Noels, your Rayshawn Terrys, but still was a team that was extremely young and kind of exceeded some expectations. And Bobby Frazier leading that group along the way. I mean, you know, a guy that maybe his minutes went down when Lawson came in, obviously, because Lawson was just so good at what, especially in the system Carolina was trying to run. But that freshman year from Bobby Frazier really stands out. And another guy that had, you know, stuck around, had some injuries throughout his career, but ended up having a solid career at North Carolina.
Well, he was a starting point guard as a freshman. And remember, that team was the year after they won the title, the Raymond Felton team. Mm-hmm. And I think David Noel was their leading returning scorer at like 3 points a game.
Yeah.
I mean, they start from scratch, and Hansbrough gets a lot of attention for that year. David Noel, maybe the greatest year for a leader Roy ever coached was David Noel that year, another wonderful dude. Tyler was phenomenal as a true freshman, but Bobby Frazier kind of kept everything together. Mm-hmm. That, you could argue that for his full season, that was maybe Roy's best coaching job at Carolina because they had basically start anew.
Everybody was.
I would also say that's the season he called the most set plays. Mm. Like they didn't score. You go back and look at the scores. They didn't score as many points. They didn't run as much. Part of it may have been the Frazier factor, although Bobby, before the injury, could move up and down the court. But there were a lot of new pieces and young guys that didn't have much experience. So part of the freelance motion offense, it takes a long time to properly learn how to run a motion offense and to play within that and to play off one another. So he caught a lot of set plays that year. And Bobby was a terrific game manager at set plays. He was a coach's son. He learned how to do that from a very young age. He could see the game through a coach. And of course, he has been coaching up in high school. I think he left his school this past year, but he was someone that spent some time in the program. And also one of the greatest, maybe the greatest storyteller I've ever covered.
Yeah, him and Hansbrough, just the bromance there is fantastic.
Well, Bobby Frazier, Marcus Ginyard, the two greatest teammates telling stories about other teammates I've ever dealt with.
Yeah. Marcus Ginyard.
They would dish on everybody.
Yeah, and I don't care what anybody says. Marcus Ginyard's the greatest backdoor cutter in Carolina basketball history. Just a fantastic and weak side.
Michael Corrin.
I'll throw him in. He's before. I'm a young buck back then, even alive. So, but in terms of that weak side rebound as well, when I think weak side rebound backdoor cut, I think Marcus Ginyard. He's the guy that stands out for my Carolina lineage. But yeah, just a.
I think of Marcus playing. Since we're talking about point guards, I think of the game Marcus had to play the point in Charlottesville when they were littered with injuries. Mm-hmm. And I think that was around the period when Tyler's big toenail was not on. It came off against Clemson. He had blood soaked in his shoe. Mm-hmm. That was the home game against Clemson. They had to win in overtime. They almost ended the streak that night.
Yeah, I was they were
ravaged with injuries.
Speaking of Hansbrough, I was actually in the stands for the Georgia Tech game his freshman year when he had 40+ points to set the record or whatever.
I covered a game at NC State that night, and that was the buzz after the game. We're all waiting for the press conference for Herb Sendek.
Everybody's talking about Hansbrough. Mm-hmm.
Everybody's talking about Hansbrough going for 40.
Oh man, he was so good. And I was young, but I still remember that game, walking to the arena, watching Hansbrough. It was a fantastic game to watch and witnessing history. I had a stretch back then where I didn't go to a ton of Carolina basketball games, but when I did, some record was set. I had a stretch for like 4 or 5 games where every time I went to a Carolina game, something big happened. You know, they either set the record for this, Hansbrough sets the record for that, somebody does something. I was on a streak for a little bit. I can't say that anymore, but
you had the magic touch, man.
I had something going on, man. I don't know what it was. We'll keep it moving though. AJ, Ty Lawson next on the list, 06 to 09. It's funny because AJ, when I think Ty Lawson, the first thing that pops in my head is baseline to baseline against LSU in the NCAA tournament. I don't know if this, and for me, it was a big thing on TV. I don't know if this was the first time it was talked about, but it stands out because I'll never forget ESPN replaying him going baseline to baseline in like 3 seconds, but actually having a timer down there. Yeah, they had a little timer down there. That's like, when I think Ty Lawson, I think arguably, in my opinion, when you look at the way Roy liked to play, he was like the ideal point guard for the way Roy liked to play because he was so fast. He was so good. He was physical. He had a little bit of that screw you to him, as you like to say. He's a screw you player in a lot of ways. And that stands out to me. And also the and one against Duke, I believe, during his either freshman or sophomore year, where he kind of flexed in the camera and Cameron Indoor. Maybe it was his junior season. Can't remember. But those are the two plays that stand out. Quick, fast, tough, and just a really good Carolina point guard. One of my favorite Carolina point guards to watch. For sure. Ty Lawson was exceptional.
Yeah. I think that was his sophomore year.
I think it was sophomore year. Yeah.
It took him a while. He didn't start the first 6 or 7 games. Bobby was still starting.
Mm-hmm.
You know how you had to earn it. Just wasn't going to anoint in certain spots. And also Ty had to deal with some maturity stuff when he first got there. And I think that was something that carried a little bit in the early part of the sophomore year, but he got it. Roy did a magnificent job bringing him along, coaching him, communicating with him, and having stuff sink through. But as a true freshman, I'll tell you that the thing that sticks out to me about Ty was learning about SpongeBob. I didn't know a whole lot about SpongeBob
socks. I forgot about that.
The SpongeBob boxers, everything.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
SpongeBob socks in games. Mm-hmm. And I got married in 2005. My wife had a couple of boys, and I remember coming home from like an interview session or something like that, saying, "Okay, so what's this about SpongeBob?" So one of them's all excited and puts it on TV, and I watched like 7 episodes of SpongeBob.
Great show.
I actually did it.
Great show, man.
SpongeBob SquarePants. Krabby Patty. I know.
I can't see you as a SpongeBob guy, AJ.
Well, I'm not a SpongeBob guy per se. This was work.
Research.
This was research.
Yep.
I needed to watch it so I could better understand Ty. So I went back and told him, so I watched a bunch of SpongeBob and he started cracking up. And I said, Krabby Patties look pretty good, man.
They did.
And I'll tell you another thing I remember about Ty is in 2007 when they lost the regional final to Georgetown in overtime. That was a game they had a lead and just kind of let it. They weren't ready yet. They weren't mature enough yet. And that's what showed at the end of that game. I walked into that locker room, and I'm not going to say who wasn't crying, but everybody on the team, except one player, was crying. They were in tears. And I go over to Ty. You got to be really careful, or not careful, but you got to find a tender side in a moment like that. And go over and approach someone, and Ty's head's down and everything. And you go over and say, "Ty, you got a minute?" He's still in uniform. His shoes are off. They're in front of him, and he's down. He just like puts a finger up, like, hold on a second. And he comes up, and he's really emotional. And there was a lot of talk about him going pro. And I knew right then and there he wasn't going pro.
Yeah.
There's no way, because that wasn't going to be his last taste. Now, his last taste was obviously something special in Detroit a couple of years later, but that was one of those moments where I knew it meant a lot. I mean, some people thought Ty was just too immature, maybe was a little bit too Ty driven. He was Ty driven. There's nothing wrong with that, because the better he got, the better the team got.
Exactly.
But it mattered to him. And that was a moment where everyone, you've dealt with it. You have those little snapshot moments with people and with teams in certain situations where you just kind of hold on to it and it sticks with you. And that moment stuck with me. I knew that he was on the right track there.
Oh yeah, no, just a great player, and again, one of my favorites to watch because of how electric he is. Again, how tough he was, and I mean, he's just a really good basketball player. I mean, I played in the NBA for a while, played overseas for a while as well. He was close to being an all-star in Denver. Yeah, man, he was really, really good, and the shot against Florida State stands out as well, winning that one. I mean, it's just so many moments with Ty Lawson, but that LSU
ACC Player of the Year,
always
ACC Player of the Year in 2009, not Tyler.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, just really, really good, and a huge reason they were able to win that national championship so comfortably during 2009. All right, AJ, moving on. Kendall Marshall played at Carolina from 2010 to 2012. First-team freshman All-America, third-team All-ACC, led the ACC in assists as a freshman year, AJ. Kendall Marshall, in my opinion, was one of the funnest Carolina, in my lifetime at least, Carolina point guards to watch for a completely different reason than a Ty Lawson. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the greatest athlete. He wasn't the greatest shooter in the world. But something about his ability to get in the lane, get around defenders, and dump the ball off to bigs or kick it out for guys. He was just such a fantastic passer of the ball. One of the few pass-first point guards, at least in my time of really remembering and watching Carolina basketball. Kendall Marshall is really the guy that stands out. But for a different reason, I know 2012 could have gone so much differently if he doesn't hurt his wrist. But for me, Kendall Marshall was just such a fun basketball player to watch and such a smart basketball player to watch. And his impact, let's not forget, his impact of when he took over that team his freshman year, I mean, just can't go unnoticed, AJ. They really never looked back after that, and they were just such a better team with him at the helm. Yeah, I mean, Larry Drew's name is Mud in Chapel Hill, but he was a really good player. Yeah, especially coming out of high school. Yeah. Played in the NBA some. So, I mean, he was pretty damn good. Yeah. But he wasn't the right guy for that team. Kendall was.
and then Kendall taking over, that was the springboard into 2012, which should have been a team that at the very least got to the Final Four without the injury to him. The thing I remember most about him, and I guess if I were to describe his game and what popped to me, was I've never seen a guy play with his head up more than Kendall Marshall. He saw everything. He was so dialed in and saw the other 9 people on the floor at all times. His head was always up. And that's even when he would turn his body. He used to turn his body to the basket some as a point. And a lot of points don't do that, but he still saw everything. His head was always up, and he was 6'5". So he could see a lot more. He could see over guys. He was a long 6'5". He kind of reminded me of Keith Gatlin, who played at Maryland back in the 80s when Len Bias was there. A point guard who was long, could turn his body and still see everything. Gatlin did that too. And Kendall was just phenomenal at that. And he anticipated well. We talked about anticipation. I did a podcast with David about Elliot Cadeau, how he anticipates well. I thought Coda and Marshall were by far leaps and bounds above everybody else that's run the point that I've seen at Carolina as far as anticipating what others are going to do, seeing what's going to happen 2 movements before they happen. Kendall was like that too. And, he had big men in Zeller and Henson that sometimes the best move a point guard can make is a one-on-one basketball play, get it to the big guy. You know what? He got it to the big guy. 2012, Zeller was ACC Player of the Year. Kendall Marshall was a big part of that. When Tyler was open, Kendall fouled him. He was so good, so efficient. And he wasn't super fast like you mentioned, but his pitch ahead in the break, better than anybody I've ever covered at any level. And I've covered NBA. And the ball moves faster than the body. So a lot of the time, it didn't matter what his feet did. It was the ball that mattered with Kendall, and the ball always got there.
Yeah, just fantastic. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, for your sake, AJ, another DMV area guy, Tendon Bishop O'Connell. I know your neck of the woods, Arlington, Virginia. I had to throw that in there.
He's from just south of where I grew up. Yeah, I'll be driving right by there in 4 days.
Yeah, and he was always very. I remember when he was in school and early in the NBA, he was very active on social media. One of the first Carolina players that I remember being very active on Twitter and kind of having a big following over there. And you could tell a lot of reverence from where he's from. He has a lot of appreciation, a lot of respect for the DMV, and was always kind of putting it out there that that's where he's from. But I had to throw that in there, AJ.
He should.
That's your neck of the woods, 100%.
He should.
A lot of people from that DMV area, man. It's
especially
take a lot of pride in that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Especially Northern Virginia.
Yeah. No doubt about it.
I don't claim Maryland.
Yeah.
Except the Orioles. I'm a Virginia guy, Northern Virginia guy.
Except the Orioles for sure. I know you definitely claim them. All right, AJ, let's keep it moving. Marcus Paige coming up next on the list. Played at Carolina from 2012 to 2016. Tough little nut. That's one of the first things that kind of pops in my head when I think Marcus Paige, the famous Roy Williams quote. I can't remember if he called Ty Lawson a tough little nut too. I feel like he did for some reason, but Marcus Paige for sure
was
tough. Yeah, 100% tough little nut. Games that stand out, performances at PNC. It seems like he just loved playing against NC State. And another guy, man, that it's such a shame that shot in the national title game in 2016 isn't remembered as much as it should be because of what happened after it with Jenkins. But God, man, just a guy that was so good his first 3 years at Carolina. And I know performances in some ways maybe dipped from the expectations he set during his senior year, but he was still really, really good, a really, really good player for Carolina. It was so important. And for me, I know people around my age, a little bit older than me, a little bit younger than me, Marcus Paige is just a guy that they just love. And another guy on the list, AJ, that in terms of really good Carolina players that never won a national title, he's high up on that list, and a guy now that, has returned to Carolina and is on staff now and doing some stuff for the program as well. So I know Carolina fans are excited about that too, but Marcus Paige, just a guy that another really, really good point guard for the Tar Heels.
He was a borderline great college player sophomore year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so good.
He was really, really good. Then there was the dip, and he also dealt with injuries. He had that plantar fasciitis that really hampered him his junior year, and I think it still affected him occasionally his senior year as well. And I didn't really know what that was. I did research on it, and just the idea of how painful that must have been. He had to get a lot of treatment just to get on the court a lot of the time. So kudos to him. Another tough dude, kind of not big, doesn't look like the kind of guy you would pull into a back alley to help you fend off the bullies, but he was a guy that would be more than willing to go in that alley and help you fend off the bullies and do pretty well at it, because I think that he was probably opponents at times may have anticipated what kind of dude he was. He was quicker than people thought. He was much tougher than people thought. There was a complete mission on each play edge that he had that, again, when Roy says tough little nut, that's what he's talking about. Mm-hmm. I mean, Marcus did everything a notch higher than you would have ever expected him to do because he had that inner drive. He had as much inner drive and had that personal dog. Maybe not the dog would affect everybody else, but he got some dog in him that you would never know seeing him shopping in a grocery store right now. But he had it. You wouldn't know seeing him come out and shoot warm-ups, but he had it. And he used that his freshman year. People thought Roy was nuts when he put him out there as a starting point guard. Yeah. Like, he looked like a little kid. Mm-hmm. And yet he was good. And that's where Tough Little Nut was born, at least in Chapel Hill. And I probably, this is just a generalization here, but I would imagine of all the players that I've covered that Roy coached at Carolina, which is all of them, he had more descriptions like that in a positive way about Marcus than anybody else he coached. Because to best understand his game and to best articulate his game, you had to go to descriptions. You had to use adjectives like that. Mm-hmm. Because that was a part of what made all the finesse stuff work. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really appreciate about Marcus's game. Also, one of the smartest dudes I've ever covered. One of the smartest guys I've ever talked to anyway.
Yeah, I imagine he had to be a great interview. I mean, he just had to be.
He's just a really, really smart guy. Yeah. Really smart guy.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be interested. I'm glad he's back in Chapel Hill. I think a lot of Carolina fans are excited about that with him being around the program again. I think a lot of people will be looking forward to seeing him coming up in November, December when the season gets started again. AJ, moving on, Kobe White played obviously 1 year at Carolina, 2018, 2019. And it's funny, AJ, because to me, Kobe White, I had this thing in my head for a long time where, and I've heard. I'll do a little sidebar real quick. Theo Pinson has a podcast. We were talking about this a little bit off camera, and he's had guys like Justin Jackson, Reggie Bullock on, former Kenny Williams, former Carolina players. And he's kind of talked about, their time in high school to where they are now in the league or wherever they may be. And all the guys said, Theo, Jackson, Reggie Bullock, 3 really good Carolina players, 2 of them won a national title, said that the freshman year at Carolina was such an adjustment. And it was such a learning curve physically in terms of conditioning, getting used to the speed, the physicality, and just getting used to having a target on your chest every single time you hop on the court. Freshman year, all 3 of them said it was really, really hard to adjust. And you go look at their freshman year stats, none of them were exceptional. But Kobe White for me, and even looking at Marcus Paige, he averaged 8.2 points per game his freshman year. Kendall Marshall, 6.2 points per game his freshman year, 6 assists. Ty Lawson, 10 points a game, 5 assists. Bobby Frazier, 6 points a game, 4 assists. None of these guys were absolutely tearing it up statistically. And then Kobe White comes along, 18.5 points per game, 4 assists, started 20 of 22 games. For me, he kind of banished a myth in my head, not a myth, but he went against the grain a little bit in terms of a freshman point guard coming in North Carolina and being just really, really good from kind of minute 1 to his final game at Carolina. He just looked like he slid in perfectly. And last thing I'll say about Kobe White as well is just the impact he had and how good he was. But the thing that helped him out, AJ, was the team he came into. Experienced, really talented, a lot of guys. Kind of reminds me of the situation in some ways, even though it's a lot of transfers that Carolina is bringing in, of Cadeau coming in. Cadeau's coming into a team that has a lot of experience and a lot of veteran guys on it. Kobe White kind of came into a similar situation, albeit a lot of those guys besides Cam Johnson had been around the program instead of coming in and this being their first year. But Kobe White, man, was he a fun guy to watch.
And he was that prolific with Luke May and Cam Johnson also on the floor.
Yeah, Kenny Williams
that
being
team,
out there too. I mean, just, man.
If that team wasn't throwing up all over the place in Kansas City, they very well, I think they were better than Kentucky. Could have beaten Kentucky in the regional final like Auburn did. Could have gotten to a Final Four, and they would have played Virginia and probably would have scored 30 points and lost. But anyway, Kobe didn't start. He did start right away, but it was the Kobe Seven Woods deal. That was not as dramatic as Bobby Frazier and Ty, because when Ty took over as starting point guard in 2007, a lot of people still made a cogent argument that Bobby should still have the job. Nobody made the argument about Seventh, even though Seventh had some pretty good spots in there occasionally, the Gonzaga game being one. Kobe was just a really mature player. And I think what we saw in Chapel Hill was what started 2 years earlier. I remember when he committed to Carolina, he was rated like number 64 in the class. And I called him that night and he answered the phone and we talked about it. And he said something to the effect, I'll paraphrase, I'm not going to be 64 forever. He knew his game was moving up, and then he kept moving up the charts. His game was still very much in a skyrocket ascension when he was in Chapel Hill. And I'll tell you another quick little Kobe White story. I remember media day that year in October. I was doing a story. I wanted to do a story on the dog, like remember Nasir Little was the prize catch there. He was number 3 or 4 player, depending on, I guess maybe one service had him number 1. Yeah, he was the guy. And I went around asking all the returning players, who's the dog? Who's of these freshmen? Who's the dog? Fully expecting everybody to say Nasir. Not one guy said Nasir. They all say Kobe. So I thought that was interesting. And I had to go back and listen over again to make sure that's what they were saying, because I fully expected it to be Nasir, but it was Kobe. And we saw not long after that Kobe was a dog. He had all that in him. And I think the Kentucky game in December in Chicago was the game in which he became one of the older guys too, because I remember talking to him in the locker room after the game. They lost to UK. They did not play very well offensively. They were stagnant that night. It was just a sluggish performance. And Kobe is sitting there in the locker room talking with me loud enough that other guys could hear him about, well, what they weren't doing right, what this guy may have been doing, like their positions, like all the different things the team did wrong offensively that night. And I realized, okay, he's got it now. He's comfortable expressing himself like that to the media about things they didn't do right. He's now the point guard. I'm not going to say it was his team, but he took a chunk of ownership of the team that day. And we saw that the rest of the way. Yeah. And he was sensational. Some games he was just off the charts good.
Yeah, he was electric. And I think the hair made him that much more fun to watch too, because it was always kind of flailing in the wind behind him. But he was hard to miss. Let's just put it that way. And another guy from that Wilson Rocky Mount area, funny enough too, and where he went to, I believe he went to Greenfield, I think is what it's called. But another Carolina point guard from that area, just some lineage down there for sure. All right, AJ, Cole Anthony, we're getting close to being done with this list. Cole Anthony, 2019 to 2020. Stat line, at least points per game, 18.5, points per game. I think the thing with him, AJ, is we didn't really get to see, got hurt for a lot of the year. Didn't really get to see him as much as we would have liked. And also just wasn't, unfortunately, on a great team at the time, with a lot of transfers coming that didn't work out. Just wasn't an incredibly talented team at the time, a team that really struggled that year. Unfortunate, again, that he maybe wasn't in maybe a better team, for lack of a word, didn't come into a little bit better of a situation, because he was a really, really talented guy that Carolina fans were extremely excited about. But, I mean, first thing that stands out for me with him is I was on the baseline for that Notre Dame game, first game of the year. And boy, was he electric. And that, unfortunately, might have kind of been the peak for him at Carolina with how the rest of the year worked out. But another guy, in terms of, you can see how talented he is because of what he's doing in the league. But just for me, he's one of the bigger what ifs in Carolina history, because I would have loved to have seen him on a better overall, more talented team, maybe like the team that Kobe White took over, even though I do think Kobe White was the perfect fit for that team.
Yeah, that Notre Dame game, and then the win at Syracuse at the end of February that year, those were his two best performances. That one win at Syracuse was that team's best game that season. Yeah, that first game, I remember you and I did 3 things afterwards, and we probably overinflated what he was going to mean to the team that year in college basketball. They started losing games. They were losing before he got hurt, and then he got hurt, so they continued to lose. I think that history, at least right now, and we're not so far removed from it that we can have a historical look on it, but history is probably going to view him in accordance with what the team's record was that year. You cannot question the talent. You cannot question a degree of maturity because of the stuff he had been around in his life with his parents and his stepdad and what he had seen and experienced, different than other kids. He came in with a with a different life resume than other guys. And I think that helped him, and sometimes maybe it hurt him.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't question the talent. And I think there was a want there. I remember the game at Florida State, which was 2 games, the second game after he came back from the injury. They go up there and he's like 3 for 19. And they lost a close game. They were ahead for a while in that game. And afterward in the locker room, another reporter and I went over to Cole, and you could find, I've told you about this before.
It's on YouTube. The interview.
Yeah.
Somewhere. We
go up to him and talk to him, and it's like 6 minutes, and he never picked his head up. I never saw his eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was in agony over the way that season had gone, and his 1 year of North Carolina experience was going. Nothing went the way he thought it was going to go. And I commend him for never, ever avoiding the media. I commend him for manning up. And even in that moment, which I think was the injury, okay, he knew he was going to come back and be fine. That moment may have been, if there ever was a moment of doubt, like, my gosh, I don't know if I'm the guy that I thought I was. I'm not suggesting that was the case. If there ever was a moment like that, it was that moment. And we're in there talking to him. He never picked his head up. And he's twirling with his hair the whole time.
I remember
I felt bad for him. Mm-hmm. I felt bad for him. You know, it's impossible sometimes to not feel something for some of these guys in certain moments. And that was one of those moments where could have pressed on with some more questions, got enough, backed off, went and talked to some other guys.
Yeah.
And that will remain with me forever. I have lots of those little snippets like I was talking about earlier that stick with me. That one sticks with me. I knew he cared. There was a narrative going around out there that he didn't care, but I know firsthand because I saw it right there. He cared about himself and he cared about the team, and that was the reality, that the direction of this team, people still held out a candle that, hey, maybe they're going to get it going because they were Carolina and Roy was the coach and Cole was back. That night was the evidence they weren't going to get it going, and he was highly bothered by it. Yeah,
I was able to cover most of that season too, and yeah, never a doubt in my mind after a while that he cared and really wanted, and you could tell just how much it hurt. I mean, that's not the Carolina experience he wanted to have, you know, and it's, again, with his talent level, that's probably not the Carolina experience he deserved to have with how just individually talented he is, because I think he is one of the more individually talented guys on this list. But again, it sometimes that's just the cards you're dealt, but he's, you know, had a fantastic career so far with the Magic in the NBA, and the talent's there, and you can see why he was such a highly rated kid coming out of high school. But definitely one of the bigger what ifs for me in terms of what could have been, what kind of impact and how good of a team he could have been a part of. Last guy on the list, AJ, Caleb Love. You guys know who he is. Played at Carolina from 2020 to 2023. You know, a guy that COVID year, freshman year. And I think you have to commend every freshman, RJ Davis as well, guys that came in that situation. I remember just how weird it was covering games in the Smith Center with nobody in there except 20 media and 2 teams, and just how eerie and how weird it was. And we talked about ad nauseum that year, how these guys weren't getting the true Carolina experience. And I know Caleb went on to do what he did his sophomore year, went on to struggle his junior year last year for Carolina, and soured his reputation among Carolina fans in some ways, even though I still think there's a big reverence from a majority of the fan base with what he did for the Tar Heels. But for me, his freshman year, we'll focus on that one specifically because we talked ad nauseum about Caleb and his struggles with consistency throughout his career at Carolina. But I think his freshman year, a guy that, you know, was fine. I thought he was okay. He wasn't necessarily exceptional, but I think everybody saw the talent there. A lot of people assumed he was going to be a one and done. It didn't quite work out that way. A guy that's still in college at Arizona right now. But overall, just when I think that year, I think him and RJ Davis, maybe Carolina being a little bit better, obviously with RJ at the helm in the long run. But Caleb Love, the high end, AJ, was exceptional. But the consistency will always be something that I think Carolina fans will talk about with him because it just, for whatever reason, was never there.
Yeah, the thing that he probably missed more than anybody else, because he was on the ball more. I mean, Roy was trying to make him a point guard. He was
trying to make him the guy, yeah.
And remember when Hubert took over, Hubert said, you know, I think Caleb Love can lead the ACC in assists. So the expectation was he was a point guard. And when you're a freshman point guard playing for Roy Williams, you need to be around Roy Williams all the time. You need to have face-to-face. You need to have that direct teacher-pupil relationship ongoing constantly. And in the COVID year, that wasn't possible. They weren't, they just had to, everybody knows what they had to deal with. Okay. So I don't need to sit here and itemize everything. The fact that they didn't have nearly as much FaceTime with each other in person that Roy had with Kobe White the year before hurt Caleb. And I think that there are things he missed that year that he never gained. So had COVID never occurred, I think Caleb would have had a different freshman year. I think he would have had a different sophomore year. I think he would have had a different junior year. Now, eventually a guy's going to have to catch up to it, but he had a year under a legend and didn't really get that year under the legend the way everyone else had before him. So I think that hurt him. And I think that's part of why that relationship grew, because after Roy retired, I think that Caleb started to understand Roy better because he could be around him more. And I think one of the special moments I used to look for, I know you did, I know Kevin Roy, our photographer, used to try to get the photo a lot. When Caleb would come out of the tunnel, when they did their final run onto the court, he would reach up and give Roy little bit of a hand tap.
That's really cool.
That says a lot about Roy.
Really cool, yeah.
I kept telling people that I thought Caleb was a good guy. Now, I don't know what kind of teammate he was because I wasn't in the room for that, but I know that I can get a feel for dudes when I deal with him a lot, and I talk to him a ton. And when I saw that, that showed me that the effort was there to get what he needed to get out of it. He knew he had to grow. He was open about it, and his relationship with Roy grew. And maybe Roy was part of getting, with Steve Robinson, Arizona, to get him over there. Maybe he should have gone there in the first place.
Yeah.
Who knows? And I hope he does well there. And by the way, they play at Duke.
That's going to be fantastic. That's going to be fantastic.
That's pretty wild stuff. A lot of Carolina fans will be rooting for Arizona for the first time in their lives.
You said it, AJ. You said it off. Right. I want to throw this out there. You said it. We were talking about this earlier this week. I think you said, I said, I guarantee you this happens, but I need somebody in that game with a Caleb Love UNC jersey on in Cameron. I mean, I think someone will do it. I think it's a shoe-in, but I need somebody to do that. So if anybody's watching, can get a ticket, knows somebody at Duke, see if you can get in there and put the Caleb Love, because I think that would, and I hope he sees it too, because I think that would just be fantastic to see his reaction.
That's what makes this stuff fun, right?
And just you talk about winding up the crowd. You might get. It
almost has to happen.
But
anyway, Caleb leaving. It was time for him to go. Time for the program to have him go. It's time for him to personally go. I wish him nothing but the best. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed covering him. He was a stand-up guy. And he'd go 3 for 19, and he would sit there and answer questions.
Yeah, you can't.
Go up to him in the locker room. Mm-hmm. Go up to him in the locker room after a game, answer the questions. Mm-hmm. He acknowledged the frustration this past year. So you could see it, man. You could see it on his face. People that are out there, the fans that don't get a chance to really know these kids or see them in a different light, sometimes just view them as here to advance to satisfy their need to win and entertain them. And that there's a lot more there too. And I think Caleb's a perfect example of that. I think he's not appreciated enough. You said there's reverence for that shot and that run.
Yeah.
Just like there is for Hubert during that time, but there's not reverence for a lot of other stuff. And he's just a kid, man. He's just a dude trying to figure things out. And he's doing it under this microscope of North Carolina basketball. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. It's not easy at all, especially when the program's going through a period of 4 straight 10-loss seasons and there's no Roy and people are paranoid about the future and they're dumping a lot of stuff on him. And to his credit, after his last game against Virginia in the ACC tournament, he stood there and answered the questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I appreciate him for that.
I think him and even RJ need to be, I think real quickly, we'll wrap it up in a second, but I just want to say, I think there needs to be an understanding from Carolina fans as well of what they came into. I mean, think about it coming into Carolina with the COVID year, ends up being Roy's last year. So the experience that you signed up for playing under a Hall of Fame coach, you don't really get to experience. You don't really get to experience the fans. And then the next year, you're under a new coach who I know was the assistant and obviously, have a lot of respect for Hubert and everything. But those guys came into a very, very unique and tough situation at Carolina. And it was even propelled even higher with Roy deciding to retire after that year. And then the run was awesome, but you're still playing under a guy. The experience that you probably thought you were walking into isn't the experience that you ended up getting. But credit to those guys for sticking around. Especially, I know Caleb ended up transferring, but sticking around for as long as they did and doing what they were able to do during their sophomore year, that can't go unnoticed. But I think a lot of people just forget that. The experience that they walked into is not typical of anybody on this list, really, AJ. They had to walk into such a different environment, even with the world and the program and everything like that. So I think they need to be commended for how they handled it, but also there needs to be some understanding there that it wasn't your typical Carolina experience for a lot of different reasons. But I just had to throw that in there as well. But we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, AJ, because this is a longer daily drop, and it needed to be because there's a lot of different guys to talk about, man. So hope you guys enjoyed it. I guess eventually maybe we'll do one next offseason. We'll be talking about Elliot Cadeau, and we'll have a lot to say about what his year went like and be interesting and fascinating to see. But definitely a topic that's on top of mind for Carolina fans right now with Cadeau's situation, expecting him to start at point guard as a freshman next year for the Tar Heels. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones, another daily drop. Appreciate y'all watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. We want to hear from you guys as well. So reach out to us on Twitter if you like some of these guys, any memories that stand out. Reach out to us on our premium message boards. You can sign up for just $8.33 a month. You can do it on our Facebook page at Tar Heel Illustrated as well. All the links are below. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks.